Hi everybody, welcome back to June's wrap up of all the books that I've read this month. I'm super excited about this list because it was definitely a reading heavy week or month. I don't really remember how much I read in May. My guess is like 7 books, probably around there. Well, this month I upped the ante to 9.5. Technically I still have 3 more days of June, so I probably am going to finish that half book, but I'll probably end up counting it as July just because I like to have these out in a timely manner, and also is kind of getting like excited to post, so just wanted to go ahead and get it out of the way. So without much further ado, I want to go ahead and hop right in. So this month we had, I think that they were all 4 or 5s. I have them written. Yeah, we've got 3 5s and then 6 4s, which is a pretty good month for me. It was also my birthday month, which you might have seen on the vlog before. It was my birthday blog, basically, where I went out and let myself buy a bunch of books, 5 more specifically. A lot of those are on this list, and I'm really happy with all of my purchases so far. There are 2 that I haven't gotten to yet. But here we go. So the first book is off of my May wrap up as one that I'd started but hadn't finished, so didn't really talk too much about, and that is Anxious People by Friedrich Bachmann. And as I'd said before, I don't remember where I was at, but going into that book, I was like pretty hesitant. It was one of those that I picked up off the library shelf because I had been telling myself like, oh, I probably should read that for a long time. It might even have been a newer book, but basically all of Friedrich Bachmann's book, because I read them and I like them, but I also know that the tone is so similar, and for me, for whatever reason, that is a turnoff. But basically with this book, it is about a bunch of people who get stuck in a building during a hostage situation after this person tries to rob a bank. And then the aftermath, where a policeman and his coworker, who's also his father, are trying to figure out who did it. So it kind of leads you along with the policeman in that you don't know who it is, and the descriptions of the bank robber is very vague intentionally so that you wouldn't be able to figure it out. But I mean, yeah, I was actually somewhat surprised by the end. I didn't realize it, but I was really pleasantly surprised by this book. It had me tear up at a few moments, because something that Friedrich Bachmann does really well is makes little moments really touching and emotional. Sometimes I think he does it a little bit too much, where like the end of several paragraphs in a row would be something like, and then they locked eyes and realized that nothing else matters, which of course it's worded way better than that because he's a master writer and I am a master reader. Big difference though. So there were moments that I was like, okay, that's really sweet. And ultimately it carried one of my favorite messages of all of literature, which is it's people that matter in your life, in everyone's life. That's a belief that I hold. So I really enjoy reading books that line up with that, because I do think that sometimes reading can be spiritual in that it reminds you of the bigger picture. And I think that's a big part of spirituality. But I don't want to get too into that. I will say that some of my favorite characters were, there was a couple that were older and pretty grumpy, and from the beginning you're like, I'm not gonna like these people, but they really end up shining in the end, which I appreciate a lot. So that's all I'll say about that one. So as I said, a 4-star read. I would recommend. Moving on, the next one is Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and this one was slightly opposite. It was something that I was really excited to read, that I thought would be really good, but as soon as I opened it up, I was kind of getting the gist of what the book was going to be. And essentially the main character is going through a pretty tough time in that she feels like her life is aimless. She has some mental health struggles that just feels like it's not going to be resolved. And she's pretty disconnected from all the people in her life. And so she does end up, trigger warning, but not a spoiler, taking her life. And then after doing so, she finds herself in the Midnight Library, where you can open up different books and it will take you to different versions of your life if you had made different choices. So she goes through a bunch. Some of them are she is a rock star, or she marries who she thought was the love of her life, a bunch of them. And then the main ending, which I won't tell you, I did predict from like the very beginning. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's part of what disappointed me about this book I could have told you everything that you needed to know about it from the beginning. Does that mean that I regret it? No. I'm very happy that I read it, but it didn't live up to the hype, in my opinion. I think it was probably like a 3.5 rounded up. 4, I don't really remember how it got to the 4. It was an interesting premise, but I just really didn't believe in the story that much. And there are a lot of side characters that I never felt connected to. It felt a bit more like a parable than a story for me. So, Midnight Library. I would recommend it, but probably not as highly as others on this list. So next up, we've got Severance by Ling Ma. And this is a book that I've recently heard a lot about from booktubers that I'd started listening to. And basically, the big draw that I think was that it was published right before COVID, by a year or two. And it's about this pandemic that admittedly seems worse than what COVID was because it attacks your mind. So say that I read all the time, obviously. So it would attack me and then I would get sick. But instead of me just like dying or not being able to move, my nervous system is basically hijacked. So I end up repeating over these moves over and over again. So for me, it would probably be like going to a bookshelf and like looking, scanning, putting it back, going back and doing it just over and over again until my body gives up, which is a very scary idea. I actually had a nightmare about this the day after, where I was like one of the last people who hadn't had it, and all the people I loved were around doing their repetitive tasks. But what's interesting is that although the main protagonist is one of the last people that she knows, is the last person that she knows that's alive, except for this core group of people who she tags along with. It's kind of like a post-apocalyptic feel. She is big into repetition, which is a major theme. That's also not a spoiler, it's on the back. So I think that there's a lot to unpack there, and sometimes I wish that I could do more spoilers on here because I want to like think about it more, and I am an external processor more than an internal one, but it was so good. There are lots of moments that were eerily similar to COVID, even though the diseases were so different. A lot of the things regarding masks and the like political vibes that went with it. Some people were against, some people were for, but then there was so much that was just completely different that it didn't feel like I was just rehashing my own experience at all. Partly because the disease was so different, also partly because of the main character Candace's experience. It took some wild twists and turns, but none of them seemed too crazy. I thought about this book so much after, and I 100% think that you should read this. This might be probably top 2 or top 3 on this list. So, would recommend. Next up, we have the reread of the month, which was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And you guys should probably know how much I love this book, which is a lot, because I think I've talked about it before. But basically, this book is one of the best love stories I've read in a really long time. And it combines aspects of like being famous and historical fiction that I really find appealing, and also friendship, just the whole thing. Great read, 5 out of 5. I'm not gonna go too much into it because I might have already talked about it. Again, cannot remember, but I did have a book club about this with some friends that just so happened to be on my birthday, and we got some good discussion out of it. A lot of it, if you've read the book, you won't be surprised, was about like women and the relationship between their sexuality and power, and using your sexuality for power, or is it powerful just to use your sexuality in of its, oh boy, probably gonna edit that out. Really good discussions. We're moving on. That was a 5-star. Next up this is my first birthday book that I read, The Cubans, Ordinary Lives in Extraordinary Times. And this was by Anthony De Palma. And this book was really good. It was pretty heavy though at times. But let's get into the plot first. So it's a nonfiction book about all of the I believe they followed 5 main people or protagonists in Cuba from the time of like the 1950s to present day. And they have basically lived their lives within the Fidel Castro rule. And especially because right now I'm 90 miles away from Cuba and being in Key West. And there are tons of Cuban immigrants here. And I work with a bunch of them too. And I know one person in particular who escaped Cuba during this time. And I never realized how much they had to go through. And I know it's not different whenever it's like, oh, they're so close to me, so it matters more. That's definitely not true. But I think that the reality, you feel it a little more whenever you know people who lived through it, or realize that you would be there in just like a day's drive. I mean, an hour and a half's drive, if there was a bridge. So this book was really, really enlightening. I definitely recommend it just because I think culturally it's so important to understand other people's lived experiences. And in America, we hear a lot about the past with Cuba. And we heard about Cuba a good deal whenever the ties were reopened, and then shortly after with the whole acoustical attacks, which I don't really know what to make about it. But other than that, you don't hear about it. It's its own little world. And the people there have really suffered, but have shown such amazing resilience. And that was one of the big points of the book, is that Cuba's culture is essentially these people who have had to learn how to make do with what they're given and have become masters at it. So I had to put this book down every now and then just because it was getting really heavy and intense. But I'm so glad that I picked it up and that I was able to finish it, and I think you guys should too. So next up, we've got Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. This is the 4th book in the Bridgerton series, which, as you know, I'm a fan of. This was my favorite one so far, I think, because the main character, Penelope, is just so different from the others in that she was truly a wallflower growing up, and nobody really paid her any attention. And while she cared for herself, it showed a great picture of how somebody can say, like, oh, I understand that society views me this way, but I know that I have value. But even still, those thoughts and feelings of being less than are going to sink into that person's psyche, as it did with Penelope. And you get to see her go through some self-actualization that's really encouraging and promising, and I was a big fan. And then the romance, I will say, left a little bit to be lacking. But I think that overall the major plot twists of the book and Penelope's story as an all, carried the book terrifically. So 4 out of 5 for this book. I think that because it is in the romance category, romance section, which tends to have a very specific target group, I don't know if people would view it as one of their favorites, but I think if there were more a wider group of people who would read it, I bet that they would really like it. So yeah, 4 out of 5. I struggled with that one too. I was like, maybe I should give it a 5 out of 5 because I really did enjoy it, but I think I stick with 5 out of 5s for really moving books. And I will not say that one really, really moved me, although it did have some good thoughts in my head. Great story. It was very enjoyable. Next up, House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This book I'd heard so much about, and I was working one day and had like no work to do, which has been pretty much a saga of my life for the last little bit. And I was like, I'm not going to sit here all day. And then I said I could go ask for more work, but if I did that, basically she was having us do a bunch of really stupid tasks that didn't matter, and it was her last week, so I didn't really want to do that. So I made the decision to buy the ebook version of this book and read it. And I read it in like 1.5 days. It was really quick. That may have a part why I didn't love this book as much as others. Shortly put, this book is about a man who works for the government taking care of magical children in orphanages. And just like, he's basically a caseworker. He'll go and make sure that they aren't being harmed or hurt, and then he'll check on out. And he gets assigned this task of one of the more dangerous orphanages with the most special kids. One of which, well, I don't know, maybe that's a spoiler, I won't say. With some really special kids that he's scared of initially, but then comes to love, and as you would expect, goes on a journey of himself. The thing with this book is it was very moving. I had a bunch of highlights, a bunch of quotes that I really liked, but there were parts that were a little bit like, I know you're trying to inspire me, which makes it way less inspiring. When I'm inspired and I don't know that I'm being inspired until after I've been inspired, way more inspiring. I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but sometimes it just seemed like I was trying a little bit hard, particularly with one scene with Sid in his bedroom with, what the heck is his name? Linus. If you know what I'm talking about, let me know what you think. And with, I will say that Chauncey and Lucy, by far my favorite characters. Next up, Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This was a 4-star read. I'm not, except for the Bridgertons, usually a big reader of romances, but this was a really pleasant one. And again, the romance was really good, but I especially liked the protagonist, Eve's self-actualization, because what adult hasn't ever been like, I suck at this adulting thing, you know? But that's her, like, it's a real struggle for her, and she overcomes it, gains confidence, all while falling in love. And the male protagonist goes through a journey as well. I would really recommend it. This one had me chuckle a few times, which is not that normal for me. Last but not least, we've got Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi. This was a 5-star read. I just finished it last night, and oh boy, did it make me cry. This book follows Vivek Oji, who's a character born in Africa. I think it's Ghana. I'm gonna have to double check. In modern times, and I honestly have only read like one other book based in Africa in modern times, which is probably an indicator that I need to make sure to diversify my reading. And yes, it's great that I'm reading historical fiction based in Africa, but I probably should read more too. Anyway, so he doesn't fit in for multiple reasons. And as a result of that, and also as a result of the treatment because he doesn't fit in towards him, he developed some really serious mental health issues, and a lot of people get confused about where his mental health issues begin and where the fact that he's just different begins, because they're not the same thing. As I'm sure if you guys have mental health issues and also find yourselves within some kind of a minority, they're of course not the same thing. Sometimes being a part of a minority can lead to mental health issues because of the results of how you've been treated. Anyways, don't want to get into that too much. This book was so good and so beautiful. I was not expecting to cry like I did, because as I was reading it, I'm like, this is a very good book. I don't know if it's like affecting me as much as I thought there would want me to be at this point. Like, I don't know if I would cry at the end, because you know from the very beginning that Vivek dies. And it's all leading up to what happened around that, and who knows. I don't know, the plot twist at the end was like really what got me. If you know what I'm talking about, it's basically like part of that big secret of what happened to Vivek Oji. and it was just devastating. I want to think more about this book. I did journal a little bit about it because this might be the first book that I've read by a non-binary author that I am aware of. And you can see that experience play out throughout some of the book. And man, I don't know, it was really good, challenging, because I think of myself as a pretty widely read reader. But then I read something new and I find my mind is challenged by a space that it hasn't been in before. And that's really important. And I don't think that that's bad that it's being challenged. I think it's really good. So that was a big part of the read for me. But mostly just like how devastating it is that somebody feels like they can't be accepted by the people that they love just for being themselves in whatever way it may be. In this book, I'm not going to say too much about what it is because I don't want to give it away. So yeah, 5 out of 5. You should 100% read this book. It will change you in some small way. And then last but not least, I might have already said that, but this is truly last but not least, I'm currently reading Beach Read. I think it's by Emily Taylor, but I'll double check that. And I'm really enjoying it. It has a lot more substance than I thought that it would, which is always good. It was highly recommended by a friend. And as always, if you guys listened to this whole thing, thank you so much. I'm always open to hearing more tips and tricks about what I should be doing differently, how I can improve. But yeah. Okay, love you guys. Goodbye.